Good evening, everybody.
What how are you?
Hashem, thank you. Okay. So we're going to start with Gimel today, which I think is the last one. So it says in the tour, "Tzricha shne kelim shel mayim." So when you're doing the baking, right, you have to have two utensils with water inside. Velo yadana lama. So it says, I don't know why. Katab lasha ve'ofa de'achal isha shehi lasha kai ve'elu המים עם שאר המים שרוחצים בהם הערבה, ושאר הכלים לא תשפכם, אלא במקום מדרון, שלא יתקבצו במקום אחד, ויחמיצו לא שנה אם הן רב או מעט. So let me read this one more time. Something didn't go well here with the reading here. Yeah, so it seems like I was reading it the wrong place there. So let me do that again. So it says like this, וצריכה שני כלים של מים, אחד שמקטפת בו. So again, right, as we said, we need two utensils of water that you should have handy when you're baking the matzot. So what's the purpose of these two utensils? One is that mikatefet bo, right? That means you're basting the dough with it. Perush shetacha bo pnei hacharara. So as we said, right, that means you're basting it with on the surface. ואחד שמצננת בו ידיה. And there's another utensil there where you dip your hands in there to cool off your hands because they shouldn't be too hot. כדי שלא תתחמם העיסה. So why is that? Because we want to avoid the dough getting hot. So when you're dipping your hand into water, it cools it down. So those are the two purposes that we have, for water. And we have two separate utensils for that purpose. Okay, good. So then he brings the opinion of the Rambam. והרמב"ם ז"ל כתב, ואם היא לשה ועופה צריכה שני כלים של מים. So it says the Rambam that if she's kneading the dough and baking, right, she needs two utensils. So regarding this, says the Tur, he comments, ולא ידענה למה כתב לשה ועופה, right? He says, I don't know why he uses language, the Rambam, that she's kneading and baking. The akol isha shehi lasha kai, because he says it really applies to every woman who's kneading, right? Whether you're baking or not, that's not the issue. Ve'elu hamayim im she'ar hamayim. So he says this water with other water, the rest of the remainder of the water, sherochatzin bahem ha'areva, that we wash the trough with that. the shara kelim and on the other utensils as well. Lo tishpechem. So he says that water that you don't spill it out. I think that's a very different thing, but anyway, we'll read through it. It says don't spill it out in a place where it's like even ground. So what does that mean? It should be like slanted, inclined, right? Why is that? Because we don't want it to gather in one place. Just stay there. Why is that? Because it may leaven, he says, right? The from the dough. So he says, Lo shana imhem rav o me'at. Doesn't matter whether it's a lot or a little bit. We don't want to be standing in one place. So therefore, you should spill it out in a place where it's inclined, right? Declivity, whatever you want to call it, right? I don't know what they call it. So, anyways, that's what the tour says. That's the end of the tour. So let's take a look at the Beit Yosef. So it says Beit Yosef here. He brings the source for this halacha. Besop per kol sha'ah, right? It's over there. Men bet amud aleph in the Gemara. Perish Rashi shemitzanenet bo yadea. So as we said, right, that she cools her hands off by dipping her hand in the water. The otan shemekatefet behem mitchamemot mechom yadea. V'yaisa, right? So he says, you know what it is that. Why do you need two? Because he says that one that she's using to baste the dough, it gets hot because of her hands, and also because of the dough. So therefore, we need another utensil to cool down her hands. Okay. Katav Ran, says the Ran regarding this. אפשר שלא חייבו חכמים שתצנן את ידיה אלא לומר. So he says it's possible that the rabbis only really, obligated you to cool down your hands. שאם היא מקטפת במים שלא תקטף באותם מים. So he says that if she is this lady, right, whatever, she's using the water to baste the dough, as we said. שלא תקטף באותם מים שמצננת בהם. So she shouldn't use the same water for the basting that she uses for cooling it down, for cooling down her hands. את ידיה. Why? What's the reason why? מפני שהם מחממים ומחמיצים את העיסה. Because what happens is that it gets hot and it's going to make the dough leaven. אבל כל שאינה מקטפת במים, but it says if she's not using the water to baste, לא יצטרכו לדקדק עם ידיה חמים. So then, right, it says we didn't require her, the rabbis, whatever, they didn't require her to be so precise with this, to ascertain whether her hands are hot or not, or tzonin or cold. She'en chashash chimutz bechach. So this is because why? Because there really isn't really concern about leavening when it comes to this. ולכן פירש דלא אמרו שצריכה לצנן ידיה אלא כשהיא עופה לפי. So that's why it says, right, that she only needs to cool down her hands if she's baking also. לפי שידיה מתחממים מחמת חום התנור. Why is that? Because her hands get hot because of the oven. So the Ran is trying to explain the understanding of the Rambam that the Tur was having trouble with. Okay, that's interesting. So, because the Tur was asking a question, right? The question of the Tur was, why does the Rambam mention the fact that she's also baking? So comes the Ran and tells you the reason why that was mentioned is because the baking heats up your hands, and then you definitely need, right, some water to cool down your hands, to dip your hands in the water there. But if it wasn't for the fact that you were baking, he says, the Ran, you really wouldn't need water to cool down your hands, because he says that the basting itself, by itself is not going to do, really heat up your hands. Okay. Yeah. So let's see the Shulchan Aruch. I hope I got everything right here. We'll check the Shulchan Aruch and see if everything, we'll verify the whole thing, right? If everything was understood properly. So says Shulchan Aruch, אם האישה שהיא לשה, היא מקטפת במים. So he says, right, that if the woman who is kneading the dough, she's also basting, with water. So he says, לא תיכתף באותם מים שמצננת בהם ידיה. She should not baste with the same water that she cools down her hands with. מפני שהם מתחממים ומחמיצים את העיסה. Why is that? Because that water, right, gets hot, and therefore it heats up, because that it's gonna cause the dough to leaven. אלא יהיה לה כלי אחר מלא מים שתיכתף בו. So therefore, right, she should have a separate utensil that she uses for basting. So this way, right, you solve the problem. So says the Rama here, Umiu, be'avra be'lo tzinena yadea mutar. So says the Rama, right, b'diavad, he quotes the Rambam here, right, who says that if you did not do this, right, to cool down your hands with the water, a special utensil, he says, b'diavad, it's mutar, it's allowed to eat that matzah. So, in other words, it doesn't really disqualify the matzah b'diavad, but after the fact, right? But lechatchila, right? That's the way you should do it, right? Preferably, that's the preferred method, to have water to cool down your hands. So I'll read this one more time, okay? Make sure we understand, right? The whole thing. It says the Shulchan Aruch again. Im ha'isha shehi lasha hi mekatefet b'mayim. It says if the woman who is kneading, she is basting with water, right? So let me just stop for a second, and let's see the Mishnah Berurah, right? How he explains this. Interesting to see. Okay. Right. So exactly what we said, right? The Mishnah Berurah explained, just like the Bit Yosef, that we're talking about that she's basting, right? She's basting the dough. Right. I'm not really expert in this, so I don't know, how or why they do this, but but it seems like it's some kind of a process, they do. I'm not exactly sure what the purpose is of this. Truth is, that nowadays they do baste the dough, with all kinds of things. Sometimes they baste it with eggs, or all kinds of things, for flavor or for color, things like this, But I don't know what the purpose is of basting it with water. I'm not sure exactly what the purpose is of that. Okay, if you ladies know, let me know, because I'm not really so expert in this. But anyway, right, that's what the Mishnah Berurah says. So basically, we're on the ball, right? At least that much we know. We're getting the right understanding over here. So again, right, it says that if the lady who's kneading is also basting, with water, so she should not baste with the water, the same water that she uses to cool down her hands. Why is that? Because what's going to be is that, that water gets heated up and it's going to make the dough leaven. So therefore, she should have another, right, separate utensil that she does the basting with that utensil, and the other utensil, the second utensil, is for the purpose of cooling down your hands. Okay, I hope you understand what I'm telling you. If not, let me know if you have any questions. But anyway, right, it says the Rama, as we just mentioned, right, the Rama says that b'diavad, if you didn't do this, right, it's still kosher, the matzah. So you don't have to throw it away or whatever. Okay, good. Baruch Hashem. That's pretty much the story over here. Let's see if we got anything else here in this Shulchan Aruch. It seems like there's more. There's also Dalid. Okay, so let's see Dalid. Go back to Bet Yosef, see what's going on there. Right, so we already saw the tour, right, in this. And if you remember what the tour said, right, I'll remind you, we said that when you're spilling out the water, right, don't leave it, don't let it stand, like still, spill it out in an inclined area where the water will 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 flow away from there because otherwise we're afraid that if it's just going to stand there, stagnant, it'll cause right it'll become chametz and that's going to be an issue because you own that stuff. You don't want to have chametz right even on the floor. Okay, so that's the tour. So let's see the Bet Yosef Daled. Yeah, so it seems like we already did Daled because it was also the same as Bet. But there's two pieces here. Let's see if we can find. So this is Dalet. We already did this one. And then we have another one maybe here. Here, this one. Yeah, this is what we need to do. So it says here the Beit Yosef, right, regarding what we just said in the Torah. Beso perk kol sha'ah. It's over there in this perk, Mem Amud Bet. Tanan, we learned there in the Mishnah. Me, me tashmisho shel nachtom ishpechu mipane shemachmitzin. Right, so it says that, it says in the Mishnah there, that the water that was used by the baker, right, whoever the baker is, should be spilled out. Why is that? Because it becomes, leavened, that water. It says in the Gemara there, Mem Bet Amud Aleph, Tana shofchin b'makom midron v'no shofchin b'makom eshboren. Right. So it says here, like we said in the tour, right, that we should spill it out in a place where it's inclined, right, declivity, whatever, and not in a place where it's just stagnant. Because if it's stagnant, it's gonna get leavened like that. It's just sitting around there, right, not moving, whatever. Okay. So then he says, ואף אגב דבגמרא אמרינן דאיכא דלא לפי שאף שופכין במקום חשבונן. So even though in the Talmud it says, right, that if there isn't a lot of water, it's a small amount, then we can even do it in a place where it's stagnant. לא כתבו הריף וכתבו, the Rif didn't write it, it says, this Gemara. So that implies that he doesn't hold by it. וכתבו ראש, right, says the Rosh, Ra'anan Ran, דתמה משום דלא קימלן בכמה מיקרו nefishe. So he says, what's the reason why the Rosh and the Ran, they explain this, right? They say that, what's the reason why the Rif didn't write this halacha that the Talmud says, right? What was the halacha? The Talmud said, right, that if you have a small amount, it's okay, you can spill it out. We don't have a concern about that. So the Rif didn't write this down, didn't bring it down. So says the Rosh and the Ran, the reason why I didn't bring it down is because why? We don't believe in the Talmud. We believe Baruch Hashem, we believe in it. But the problem is that we're not sure, right, what that small amount is. In other words, like we don't have a tradition about what a small amount is. So therefore, that's the reason why we just like spill it out in a declivity, whatever. ולכך כתב רבנו לא שנה אם הם רב, אם הם מעט. So therefore, that's why the two wrote, whether it's a lot or a little, right, you still should do the same thing, right? Pour it out on an incline, because we're not really sure how much small is, how much large is, right? What's the large size, what's medium, what's small? We don't know these things. We don't have a tradition. We don't have it. So, because it doesn't say in the Talmud. Rambam, right? So he says the Rambam, Satam devarav, וכתב בפרק K, הר הזה ישפוך אותם במקום מדרון, כדי שלא יתקבצו במקום אחד, והחמיץ, וכתב הרב מגיד, so the Rambam, right, just says, right, again, he doesn't talk about the large amount, small amount, he just says, right, spill it out in an inclined place. So it shouldn't get leavened. כתב הרב מגיד, ההלכות לא רצו, לחלק בין נפישה ללא נפישה, לפי שאין הכל נזהרין. So Rabbi Magid says a little bit differently, right? What's the reason why the Rambam didn't differentiate between small amount and large amount? So he says because not everybody knows, what that is. I'm sorry, I didn't say it right. Not that not everybody knows, but not everybody's careful about it. People are a little bit negligent when it comes to these things. So therefore, right, in order to make things safer, that's why we just say, right, spill it all out, whether it's small or large, spill it out. What does that mean, spill it out? Spill it out in an incline, right? So this way, it'll move out of your area, right, and leave you there. Because otherwise, we're afraid if it's going to be stagnant, as we said, it's going to become leavened. Okay, good. So let's go on a little bit. רבנו גם כן סתם כתב כדי שלא יתקבצו המים במקום אחד. So he says the Torah also did the same thing, right? He didn't make a differentiation between large amounts and small amounts, all that stuff, right? Okay. ממילא שאם היו מועטים ולא היה בהם כדי קיבוץ, so he says automatically, right, you see that the implication is that if it's a small amount and therefore, right, it can't really, gather and become chametz, there's not enough quantity there for that. So he says, in a case like that, so then you should spill it out in a place where, which is even, right, stagnant. But he says he wanted to write like the same order as the halachot, עד כאן לשונו, ודבר פשוט הוא, דלא נאמרו דברים הללו, אלא בלש, בזמן איסור חמץ. So he says, Bet Yosef makes a important point. So he says, all these halachot that we just mentioned, right, these things we just mentioned right now, they're all talking about a case where you're baking the matzot in a time where there's a prohibition of chametz. So therefore, even if I have chametz on the floor, it's still a problem because, I own it. And it's Passover, so I'm transgressing by having chametz in my possession. But if it was before Passover, right, you're baking, then it's not a problem because what do I care, right? If there's chametz on the floor, what does that bother me? It's still not Passover yet, so I'm okay. So that's why you're right. He points that out. Important to know. Right? So he says, right, if it wasn't Passover yet, so then you could spill it out anywhere you want. It doesn't matter whether it's inclined or stagnant, right? It's all the same. Doesn't make any difference. It's all the same. Okay, that's the end of this Bet Yosef. So let's go to Shulchan Aruch. So says Shulchan Aruch, im lash achar zman isur chametz. Right? If you're kneading the dough, and we're talking about after the prohibition of chametz already, right? You can't own chametz. Important to point out, by the way, since we're talking about this, right, that the prohibition of chametz comes before Passover, the holiday, because the holiday starts at night, but the prohibition of chametz already takes place, in the late morning. So, good to, right, important to know that. So it doesn't have to be actually Passover. It could be even the eve of Passover, but the prohibition of chametz is already in effect at that time. So if it's already in effect, says Shulchan Aruch, right? So he says then, Elu hamayim im shar hamayim sherochatzim behem hareva lo yishpechem ela b'makom madron. So he says then, right, when you spill out the water, that we use to to wash the trough, that you should only spill it out in a place which is inclined. Why? Because if it's going to gather in one place, right, we're afraid it's going to get leavened like that. Good. So all the water that you're using, for the making of the matzah, that's what you should do, as we just mentioned. So says the Rama here, והכלים שנתקנים בהם המצות, שמתקנים בהם את המצות, והסכין שחותכים בו העיסה, ייגרם תמיד. So he says the utensils, the Rama mentions that you're using, to make the matzot, and also the knife that you're using to cut the dough. You should always clean them, keep them clean, right? Scrape them, right? Why? Because we don't want, right, there should be some dough sticking to these utensils, because if it's sticking there, it's going to get, right, it's going to get chametz, if it stays there for a while. So therefore, right, as a general rule, we want always these utensils to be constantly, cleaned and washed. So this way, right, we can avoid this problem of having a dough sticking to it, right, and staying there for a while. By the way, that's the same thing also applies to, when they make the matzot with the machines these days, right? Most of the matzot that are made nowadays are in the machine, they're not handmade. So those matzot, right, those machines have to be, shut down and cleaned once in a while because, of the dough that sticks to them. So that's what they do, they clean it, periodically. Some of them do very often, they clean. Some of them do, once, periodically, whatever. But the point is, right, that we want them to be always clean. So you should wash it. Clean it out, clean it, right? Okay, so same thing with the machines as well. So he says then, ולאחר העשייה ידיכם וינגבם היטב, לחזור לתקן בהם פעם שנית, right? So he says, after you made the matzot, make sure, right, that you rinse them with water and dry them, right? Make sure that they're all clean. So you can use it again, right, the next day, whatever. וזהו עדיף תפה ממה שנוהגים לגרדן. So he said, that's even better than scraping it. Because just by scraping it, he says, you can't really get it so clean. So the better way to do it, the preferred way, he says, is that you should right, wash them with water, and then dry them. Rinse them. So he says, if you want to be stringent, right, you want to do the best way. What's the best way? Do both, right? Scrape it and also wash it. This way, right, you're covering all the bases. And, okay. וביום טוב מותר לעשותו על ידי אינו יהודי. So he says, on Yom Tov, right, this kind of work of, cleaning the utensils and so forth and so on. So he says, you can do it by way of a goy. You can have like a goy, who's like working for you, right? Whatever, an assistant, whatever, and he can help you. The veim eno en eno yodi yotilem letzonen. So he says, if you don't have a goy to help you, so then what should you do? Um, right, put them in cold water or put them in the oven. Sheafeh batzek shelehem. So that's why, right? It'll burn the dough which is on it. והערבות שאפשר לתת דבר בתוכו, so he says the troughs that it's possible put something in there, מותר להדיח, you can wash them, וכן כל כיוצא בזה, says anything like that similar to that. ויש להיזהר בערבה של השין בה, שלא יהיה בו שום גומה. Says also you should be careful, that when you're using a trough, right, the board that you're kneading the dough on that, there should be no holes there, right, in that board. Or sidek, right, or some kind of crack. Because he won't be able to clean it after the kneading. ותחמיץ, and it'll become leaven there. ואחר כך כשחוזר ולש בו מתערב בבצק. Says also afterwards, when he kneads it with it, right, it'll get mixed up with the dough, right, and this way it'll be a problem. ולא ייתן ערבה על קר. So it says also don't put the trough, right, the board, whatever, on a mattress or pillow or keset, tzemer beshat alisha, right, which is made out of wool, the time of the kneading, shemechamem hareva, because it heats up the trough. Aval al shel or, but if it's made out of leather, he says shar, it's okay. So the leather doesn't get heated up, but the wool does. Okay. So I think we should read over this Ramah one more time, right? There's a lot of details here, so right, make sure we covered everything, just to make sure, right, the whole thing. Maybe we should read the whole Shulchan Aruch again. Let's see, right? We'll see what we have to do here. Yeah, we'll do the Shulchan Aruch one more time, right? Because there's a lot of details here. So again, right, it says the Shulchan Aruch, im lash achar zman isur chametz, right? If he's kneading after the prohibition of chametz is already taken effect, as you said, right? That's on the eve of Passover, right? Already in the late morning, it's already forbidden, right? When is it forbidden? After the 5th hour, right? In the morning, it's already forbidden to have chametz. So if you're making the matzot already at that time, right? Elu hamayim im shar hamayim sherachatzim mehem areva lo yishpechem ela b'makom madron. So therefore, what you should do is, right, that water that you were using, for all these purposes that we just mentioned, right? For basting the dough and for cooling off your hands, and also the water that you use to wash the utensils. All these things, right? You should spill it out in a place where there is right, inclined, right? So this way, it'll just flow away, and it won't get leavened. By the way, you can also, spilling it out in the sink is also fine because the water goes away, right? It doesn't stay there. So when you put it in the sink, it just all flushes down. That's fine, that's no problem, right? It's not going to stay there stagnant, right, in front of you. So therefore that's fine. Okay, so that's one thing, right? That's the Shulchan Aruch. Now let's go through the Ramah. There's a lot of details here. So he says, right, והכלים שמתקנים בהם המצות, right? All the utensils, he says, the Ramah, that you're using to make the matzot, right? All these utensils, whatever it may be, right? Bowls, boards, whatever, rollers, God knows, whatever you're using, whatever it is, all the stuff, right? And it says, והסכין שחותכים בו את העיסה, also, the knife that you're using to cut the dough. So these are all things which come into contact with the dough. So what should you do, right? Igarem tamid, you should always scrape them, he says, right? Beshat asya, time when you're making the matzot, shelo yidabek behem habetzek, because we don't want that the dough should stick to it. So we want like a continuously cleaning process going on, This way the dough should not stick to any place of these utensils, and this way, right, there won't be an issue that they're going to become leavened because they stood there for a long time. Ulachar asya yedhem Says after you did it, right? After you made the matzah already, then what you should do is, right, as we said, right, rinse them with water and dry them well, right? So, this way nothing will be left over there. Um, so this way, right, once you wash it off and you dry it, it's ready for, another use, right, the next time, right, the next batch, because it's already clean, so this way there's no concern. That's what the Ramah is telling you. So then he goes on, right? So this is even better than scraping it. So what did we just said, right? Just to make you understand clearly. We said that you should be scraping it, like, when you're using it, and then at the end of the use, you should wash it and dry it. So he says, right, that there are some who also do scraping after the use, instead of washing and drying. So he says, but washing and drying is superior. That's a better way of doing it than to scrape it, because it's more thorough, right? Gets more stuff off. It's a better cleaning process. So he says, because says you can't really clean it so good by scraping so much, So he says, so therefore, if you want to be machmir, he says, if you want to be stringent, what should you do? Do both, right? First do scraping and then also wash it with water, right? Okay, so then the Rama says, right? Uviyom tov mutar la'asoto al yedei yudi. So he says this process, right? We just mentioned here, says on Yom Tov, right? It seems like the Jew shouldn't do this on Yom Tov, this process. So therefore, he says, right? What you should do is have a goy do it. So the question is, right? What is the prohibition here of a Jew doing this on Yom Tov? What prohibition do we have? So let's just see the Mishnah Berurah, right? If he explains this, otherwise I'll explain it to you. Whatever, the best I can do. Right, so says the Mishnah Berurah, what's the problem over here? That, you're not allowed to wash utensils on Yom Tov. Why not? Well, what's the problem to wash utensils? What don't we wash our dishes on Shabbat? Right after the meal? We don't wash it? We do, right? So why can't you do it on Yom Tov? So the answer is like this, that he's talking about where you're not going to use it again on Yom Tov, So if you're not going to use it again, you shouldn't wash it because you're just, it's like exertion for no reason. So when do we wash our dishes on Shabbat? When we're going to use them again, right? In the morning or in the afternoon, whatever it is, right? In the evening. But if you're not going to use them again, you really shouldn't wash them. So that's what we're talking about here, that you're not going to use it again, and therefore you can't wash it. So that's one thing. So therefore he says, right, that since you can't really do this yourself, what you should do is have a goy do it, right? The goy is okay. Why is that? Because it's really, it's only a rabbinic prohibition. So telling a goy to do it in a time of need, right, is okay. Okay. So then he goes on, Ve'im en Yodi, right? It's as if there's no goy there. What should you do? Yatilem letzonen. Just put it into dip it into cold water, he says, right? Or itinem letanur, or put them in the oven, right? And it's gonna bake it, right? And burn off all that dough there. So he gives you a solution, that you can do on Yom Tov, right? Instead of actually washing it, actively. So this you're allowed to do, just like to dip it into cold water. Okay, so that's one thing, right? And then he goes on, והערבות שאפשר לתת דבר בתוכו מותר להדיח. So he says, but if you have like a trough that you can put something in there, in other words, it has some kind of a use on Yom Tov, then you can wash them because they have a use. וכן כל כיוצא בזה, is anything like similar to that. ויש להיזהר בעריבה שלהשין בה, שלא יהיה בו שום גומה. So it says Ramah another thing, right, which is that you should be careful that the trough that you're using, the board, right, or whatever, that you're using for kneading, there should be no holes there, right, or siddiq, or some kind of a crack. Why is that? Because you're not going to be able to clean it so good after the kneading, and it's going to get leavened. The dough is going to stay there in that crack or in that hole, and it's going to get leavened. And then when you're going to knead it again, right, next time use it for kneading again, it's going to get mixed up with the dough, and this way it's going to be chametz right there. There's a concern. Also, he says, don't put the trough, right, or the board on a mattress or pillow, right, which is made out of wool. Tzemer, b'shat alishal, at time of the kneading, because it heats up the trough or the board. But it says if you're using leather, right, that's okay. Shara, it's okay because it doesn't get heated up so much. So therefore, right, this is what the Ramah says. Okay, there's definitely a lot to talk about when it comes to all these details, but pretty much we covered it, right, more or less, right. We'll leave the rest. We'll leave the rest for some other occasion. Bezat Hashem. So okay, thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Bezat Hashem. We'll see you tomorrow. Chazak Baruch. Laila Tov.
Thank you so much.
All the best.